all of us. I'm sure some of you are from educational background and some of you are just, I can see one or two youth. And there's a humble request is any of you who do not have a good internet connection, you can keep your videos switched off. But those who have a better connection, can you please switch on your video so that I can interact with you by looking at you? So those of you, please go ahead. Do not mind if you look very informal on a Sunday morning, and it's all part of our approach. If some of you could at least switch on your video, I will have a better look at those with whom I'm interacting. Thank you. I already can recognize some of the faces. Thank you again, Satyapriya and Ramesh Joshi and Ramanarayan from Auroville. And what I'm going to share with you is not much known. And that is one of the reasons why I took up this topic, why integral education was needed. Now, we need to know the birth of integral education and also something about its founders. And that itself will give us an idea how much it is relevant to us. There is something which Sri Aurobindo has indicated in his writings, that some of the most important events in the history are not there in the out for everybody to see. People have hardly noticed it, and still less people have recorded it. Now, this is what he says in his own words, and I quote him: history very seldom records things that were decisive, but took place behind the veil. It records the show in front of the curtain. So what we get to know in the name of history is what happened in front of the curtain and not behind the curtain. And we must remember that the integral education, the founder, one of its founders, Sri Aurobindo, was a very, very silent man of action. One of the prominent figure even remarked that he is one of the most silent men that I have ever met. And he was the founder of integral education. And in order to know more, we have to go a little back in our history, almost to the first decade of the 20th century. You know, this was the time in around 1905 when the Bengal partition happened. But until that time, Sri Aurobindo was still part of the freedom struggle, but he was working behind the curtain, so to say, in secrecy. He was preparing the nation for a revolutionary action so that it can fight and earn its freedom. And he was moving around secretly. But the moment the Bengal partition happened, he was pushed to the foreground, because here, he said, the time has now come for us to collectively get together and then take up action against what Britishers are trying to do with our country. So this is the beginning. In fact, the coming of Sri Aurobindo from behind the veil, behind the curtain, to the forefront was in fact the beginning also of integral education, because when he came to the front, he came up with an agenda for the nation's freedom. I remember last month when Srinivas Mulugu was talking about the versatile genius of Sri Aurobindo, he also spoke about Sri Aurobindo as a freedom fighter. And just to give you a very brief background, look at how practical Sri Aurobindo came up with an agenda to free the country. And also keep in mind that some of the things that he started was taken up much later by prominent leaders of the freedom struggle, like even Mahatma Gandhi too. So what was the agenda that he came up for the nation? First thing, he looked around and then he found that nobody is asking for freedom of the country, but majority are asking to be ruled in a just way. Now, this is an interesting thing. Even the prominent party Congress had this approach, and they were almost asking the British government, all this, please rule us in a just way so that we can be happy. Sri Aurobindo came, suddenly jumped into the scene, and he said, nothing doing. What we want is complete freedom. And you remember, Sri Aurobindo was young at that time, And he was so bold and so aggressive that he said, nothing short of complete freedom. We will decide what we want to do and what type of a nation we want to become. We don't want to be ruled in a fair way. We want to be ruled by ourselves, and we are ready for it. Now, this is the first thing that Sri Aurobindo did. He came from behind the curtain to the front. And what was the 4-point program? He said, and now I think the nation is awakening to the importance of this 4-point program. But what I would like to focus on is the 4th point in a 4-point agenda which Sri Aurobindo gave. And we have to look at it very carefully to understand how much of a visionary he was. So the first thing he said is, we want complete freedom, Purna Swaraj. That was the first thing that he demanded. The second and third point in his agenda are very closely linked. First thing he said, why are we being ruled by the British? They want to make money out of it. So they want to take our own raw goods, finish it and sell it back to us. Any Indians who want to sell the product, they were taxed heavily and then pushed out of business. They are here to make money. And Sri Aurobindo said, why don't we boycott all their products? And that way, they will be compelled to review why they are here. And one thing he said is, by merely boycotting their goods is not going to work. We have to develop our own capacity to produce quality goods. Now you see how beautifully these two combine with each other. It's not okay to say to all the foreign goods, but we should be capable of coming out with our own quality products. And he called it as boycott and Swadeshi. They are all, the second and third point are very closely related. Now we want complete freedom. We want to say no to foreign goods, and we want to develop our own capacity to come out with quality goods. But all this focuses on the present at that time. He was one of the person who wanted to ask, suppose our program works, suppose we get the freedom, what will India do with its freedom? Because one look at India of that time, you will understand that it has already lost its education, which is very Indian, it is character. We had a British agenda-driven education. And that is one of the first thing that we have to look into. We have lost our education, which in fact helped us to become very great in the past. In one of the places, Sri Aurobindo says that what made India great in the past, which every historians agree, was its spirituality. But how was this spirituality imbibed by people? From the educational system. We had a fantastic educational system where the teacher helped us to find what we are good at. And that is how our nation was great in the past. And he said that if we have to become great again, we need to recover an education which is Indian in its character. And he said, this is how we will prepare the future India. Right now, we have lost that education. Our approach to what brings out the best in people. We have even lost out even our approach to health and well-being. The more and more the Western approach to health was coming in. You have a problem, pop a pill. Now, this is the approach that was taken. Here is an approach which even does not recognize that the healing power is in the body itself, and that needs to be tapped out in order for the well-being of our own personality. Now, this is the Indian approach, and we have already lost it. So if we start looking around science and technology, art, music, dance, whichever subject you take up, we have lost that originality of which India was capable of producing in the past. And then he said, we need an education, a national education, which does not follow the English people's education, which was imposed on us. But he said, it is a training of the mind and heart of the younger generation. Now, nowadays, it's become popular when we say that here is a holistic education which takes care of, the head, heart, and the hand. Now, Sri Aurobindo, in 1906, he came out with a national education whose goal is the training of the mind and heart of the younger generation. But I have to tell you that this is not yet the core of national education, which he will reveal a little later. Now this is, but before that, one of his hidden agenda at that time is to wake up the nation from its inertia. Now here is a nation which has lost its education, its art, music, dance, drama, politics, science, technology, pretty much we have lost it. And we have gone to sleep, so to say, a giant machine which has been almost like switched off. It's gone to its slumber. And in order to wake it, he has to bring it out of its own tamas and its own inertia. So he started addressing the youth of India, because at least in the youth, he found that there is still some energy left. And I'm going to share with you something that he said during a talk given at the Bengal National College in 1907 to the students of Kolkata. And when I read these words, one will catch fire just by reading this. And this is what Sri Aurobindo said, and I quote him. He says, there are times in a nation's history when providence, meaning the higher power, places before it one work, one aim, to which everything else, however high and noble in itself, has to be sacrificed. Now, some of us might think that why is he wanting us to sacrifice? If the nation has to arise from its tamas, well, we will have to stop going after some of the comforts, and we will have to come out of our own tamas and inertia. And therefore, if we have to keep this aim in front of us, we have to keep that as the only aim until the nation comes out of its tamas. And he continues, and he tells the students of Kolkata, such a time has now arrived for our motherland when nothing is dearer than her service, when everything else is to be directed to that end. And then he says something so beautiful. If you will study, study for her sake. Study for her sake. Train yourself, body, mind, and soul for her service. You will go abroad to foreign lands, because he himself went abroad to foreign lands, brought his own learning, and then he applied for this motherland. So he said, you will go abroad to foreign lands that you may bring back knowledge with which you may do service to her. To whom? To India. And then he continues, work that she may prosper, suffer that she may rejoice. All is contained in that one single advice. And he wanted the youth of India to come simply because he found that as a nation at that time, we have abandoned Shakti, the energy which actually makes us powerful and creative. And he even went out and said that we have abandoned Shakti, and therefore Shakti has abandoned us. And this is something that is so profound, that just to reawaken the India was one of his primary agenda. History has not recorded it. Our textbooks actually have not been telling us this story of how Sri Aurobindo awakened almost single-handedly, but in that time there were a few other freedom fighters also. Together they energized, I would say re-energized our country, so that a new energy flowed into India's blood. And just remember, when we think of Sri Aurobindo, we think of that his later photograph where he is so calm and so peaceful, but we do not see this fire in Sri Aurobindo, which sets a whole nation into that energized mode. And I'm going to share with you another quote just to feel that fire which Sri Aurobindo lit in everybody's heart in India. And this again is an address done to the students of Kolkata. And you can immediately see Sri Aurobindo's connect with the youth of India, and this comes out more clearly. And this is what he says. His address on June 7th, 1907 to the students of Calcutta. So this is what he says. What India needs, especially at this moment, is the aggressive virtues, not the passive virtues. Anybody who wants to come to our country, please come and then take away whatever you want is not the approach that is given to us. We need, at this moment, aggressive virtues. Now you might ask, what is the aggressive virtues? Do we have to, take up probably I don't know, arms and then start fighting indiscriminately? No. He says what he means by aggressive virtues, and I quote him, the spirit of soaring idealism. We can't set our bar low in what we want to be, what we want to achieve. Our ideal has to be right there so that we can try for that. And what about our creativity? He says, bold creation. Not a creation which conforms to the pattern set by the past, but a creation which breaks out of all molds and soars into an idealistic expression. So the spirit of soaring idealism, bold creation, fearless resistance. Now, every word that he chooses is so powerful that it kinds of makes the blood boil and then energizes it. And then he says, of the passive tamasic spirit of inertia, we have already too much. There are enough inertia and tamas in this country. We don't want it. We want the bold creation, fearless resistance, and courageous attack. And then he continues to say, we need to cultivate another training and temperament, another habit of mind. And then he goes on to conclude that what we need, what we should learn above all things is to dare. When Sri Aurobindo says we need to be more daring, so what we need, what we should learn above all things is to dare, and again to dare, and still to dare. Now, somewhere 3 times he will have to say it again just to wake us from our tamas so that we enter into a mode of bold creation. We enter into the spirit of soaring idealism, being fearless, being courageous, and this happened in 1907. But remember that fiery Sri Aurobindo is not all that Sri Aurobindo has to communicate to the nation, because we have to hear a little more before yet a deeper aspect of Sri Aurobindo comes, and whatever he has said so far, is going to take it up once again and then put it in perhaps a more comprehensive expression. And when did it happen? It happened after 1907. I would say 1 year after that, in 1908. Until that time, Sri Aurobindo was talking about the higher power, the providence, but he didn't have a living experience of it. Now, he himself says that he was, in a sense, said, I was not yet being able to experience his living presence. In me, there was still a part which was atheist, which was agnostic, which is still skeptic. So I'm not yet a complete believer in this higher power. Little bits and pieces of me were still being atheist and agnostic and skeptic. And this was the scenario when he comes across one yogi from Maharashtra, Vishnu Bhaskar Lele. Now, many of you might already know the story, but what I'm going to tell you is, after this experience, what happened to Sri Aurobindo's expression before he was completely bent upon waking India from tamas. And after that, he's going to tell you, once you have woken up from tamas, where are you supposed to turn your attention to? You have to turn your attention to a light. And that is what the Sri Aurobindo's later expression is going to be. But how did it happen? It happened in the year 1908. Now, every one of you will have to remember that this is the year which was very decisive in India's history. Call it political, historical, spiritual, economical, whatever you call it. This is an year which is so decisive, because this is the year when Aurobindo underwent a few radical experiences, because of which his vision deepened and his expression broadened. What happened in 1908 when he met with this yogi? Well, it is simple. The yogi said, sit and then observe the thoughts coming into your mind. And when they come inside, now the implication is all the thoughts you are having is coming from outside. When they come into your mind, throw them out and then empty your mind. Now, remember, he is telling it to an intellectual genius like Aurobindo, who is very strong in his thoughts. He has already given a 4-point agenda to the nation. He was so powerful in his thinking. And here is somebody comes and says that, make it empty, make it silent. Now for Aurobindo, it was a challenge, because if he empties his mind, if there are no thoughts, where is the intellectual genius that we know of? What will happen to him? But here is the beauty. Something within him said, yes, I need to see where it takes me to. And then he says, I followed Lele's instruction to the letter. And then what he did was, when thoughts came into his mind, he just threw them out. And he did it one day, second day, and the third day, he found there were no thoughts even coming into his mind. It has already become absolutely silent. So silent that none of the disturbance due to thought or even any other movement was happening. And it was what he later described as a state of absolute silence. He called it as nirvana, and that is the word that we use in Indian spiritual terminology. He says, I entered into a state of nirvana. There was only one problem. In the next few days after his attainment of nirvana, he has to deliver a talk, because he's a well-known politician and he was still in the process of awakening the nation. And he went to Lele and said that my mind has gone blank. Not even a single thought is coming to my mind. How am I supposed to give a talk to these people? And this is when Lele says that don't worry, go stand in front of them and then look at them as Narayana, God's manifestation. And then he said something very beautiful, and you have to listen to me very carefully. He says, something else will speak. Aurobindo did not question this. He went, he bowed down to the audience, and then he saw that thoughts from another source, not the source which he was familiar with, it started coming to him, and then he just had to give voice to it. And he was observing this process with a kind of curiosity of a child, because he was never aware that there could be another source which is beyond this silence too. Now, this was one of the turning point in our history, because for the last 1,000 years, I would say Indian spirituality was focusing much more on getting into that silence and making that silence as a kind of an objective to be had so that we can escape from all the troubles that we are facing. By and large, this was the turn of Indian spirituality, and very few people have spoken about and I'm sorry for the momentary breakup. Kedar, you can still hear me? All right.
Yes.
So sorry for the brief momentary interruption. Now here is the turn of Indian spirituality. Not many people have explored a dynamism which is beyond this passiveness, this silence. Now Aurobindo got a clue that beyond the silence, beyond the nirvana, there is something which is great, which we can open up to, and in a short sentence, if you have to say, we can discover a new dynamic source for knowledge and action beyond the silence. Now that is a discovery which is something which is so profound. And in fact, it gives us a clue that let us not think that spirituality means, beyond this world into some passive state where we enter into a trance and then we get blissed out. No, Sri Aurobindo says he was able to experience some a source of action and knowledge beyond the silence. Now, we also might recall in Savitri, he says very beautifully, in absolute silence sleeps an absolute power, and that power needs to be awakened. And the passage through which we have to reach out to that power is silence. So here is for the first time, he said, silence is not the goal. It is a passage to an absolute power, which is a source for a new type of knowledge and new type of action. Now, this is what Sri Aurobindo discovered in his own life. And once he has opened up to this, when Lele came and then started giving instruction, and then he had to say that, sorry, I am already being guided by this new power and the new source of knowledge and action. And then Lele said, oh, if you are doing that, you give yourself to it, and that will be your guide. And that is what, from that moment onwards, all Sri Aurobindo's speech, writing, and action came from that power beyond the silence. That was what he was opening himself up to. And then that was not yet. There was another incident too, which happened immediately after that, because the Britishers were constantly trying to imprison him, put down what was coming from him, because he was firing up the entire nation. And therefore, they put him up in a jail through a case which was a false accusation. And this happened in Alipur jail. So they put him into a solitary confinement so that he couldn't actually enter into the action phase in India, in awakening India. But what happened in the jail was more interesting, because in the jail too, he had a further confirmation of his action, his newfound spiritual experience, so much so that after a year of imprisonment, finally he was acquitted. When he comes out, he was not the same Sri Aurobindo anymore. He was not the atheist. He was not the agnostic. He is not the skeptic anymore, because he says it very beautifully. The wrath of the British was that I found God. Now God has become a living experience for me, and I have found a source which is so brilliant in its power, action, and knowledge. Now this is what he is coming. And then when he comes out, he understands more profoundly what India has to offer to this world. It is the discovery of this dynamic spiritual power is what is given to us as the real agenda. So if you have to talk about Sri Aurobindo's real agenda for the nation, is not just getting freedom for India. That is only a step on the way. The real action of Sri Aurobindo is to give a lifestyle to the people of India where we can arrange and organize our life in order to discover that dynamic power and bring it and make it part of our everyday life. And this, he found, this is the lifestyle that he actually gave to India, and he called it as Sanatana Dharma. This is the essence of Sanatana Dharma. So when he came out of the jail, in one of his writing articles, this is what he says. If you want to understand true India and recover it, this is the time for us to do it, because we need to recover this lifestyle where we make the dynamic power as part of our everyday life. And this is what he says when one of his talks after he has come out of the jail. To recover Indian thought, Indian character, Indian perception, Indian energy, Indian greatness, and to solve the problems that perplex the world in an Indian spirit and from the Indian standpoint, this, in our view, is the mission of nationalism. So his idea of nationalism earlier was to free the country. Now it has broadened its scope. And what was the scope of his nationalism? It is to recover Indian thought, Indian character, Indian perception, Indian energy, Indian greatness, and to solve the problems that perplex the world. in an Indian spirit and from an Indian point of view, standpoint, this is the vision of nationalism. And then he said, this is the whole vision for the nation. But what about the national education? Earlier he said, well, it is a training of heart and head. Now he is going to say it is not just heart and head. It is actually the discovering of this source deep within us and making it as the aim of our education. That is national education. And then he writes in Karma Yogin, which is one of the newspapers he started after he came out of the jail, the three principles which defines a true education which India needs. And this is so important, this three principles that he brings about. And I will see if I can share a screen, which I'm going to request the administrator to make me into a co-host so that I can, thank you so much. All right. What did he write in 1910? The three principles of true education. And remember, the integral education was taking birth. Even now, in 2022, the core of integral education are these three principles. So what, what did he say? He says something very beautiful. He has discovered the source of knowledge and action within himself. It's not outside. It's not in a book. It's not in a place, but it is right within us. So can anybody give this to me? If I ask for this source, nobody can give. It's there, right within us. Only it can be helped to be brought out. So in a certain sense, he defines the role of all educationists and also anybody who wants to lead anybody else. This is the first principle, that nothing can be taught. You cannot teach this to somebody that, hey, I am telling you there is a source inside. Now you have realized this source. Now you can go and then tap it out. No, he cannot be an instructor or taskmaster, but he can help and facilitate what is already within. And that is the beauty of this education, that we are not giving something from outside, but we are drawing out what is already the best within us and then make it available. Now, if you have to make what is already inside come out, you have to actually, if you are an educationist or a leader in charge of a group of people, you need to consult them in order to understand what is that unique essence which each one of them is carrying. And without consulting that, it is impossible to help all those who are with us to bring out the best. And therefore, he brings out the second principle, which says that the second principle is that the mind, and he explains what he means by the mind. He means antarkarana, the inner nature, has to be consulted in its own growth. Now, if you are a teacher, an educationist, why do you have to consult the children, the inner nature of the children? Because each one, later mother says, is meant to express a genius which is sitting inside them. The same thing, Sri Aurobindo puts it in his own words. No, almost 30 years before, mother said that there is a genius inside every one of us. To bring it out is what integral education is all about. And how does Sri Aurobindo say the same thing? Look at the assurance that he gives. And I quote him, I read him. Everyone has in him something divine, something his own, a chance of strength and perfection in however small a sphere which God offers him to take or refuse. He says he's not a Hitler who is going to tell you, this is what you have to do in life. And the God who is sitting within is going to offer a perfection, a kind of one type of a genius. And it is up to us to take or refuse it. And what are we supposed to do? The task as students of, let us say, integral education, the task is to find it, develop it, and use it. The same thing which mother later will say, there is a genius inside every one of us. It's there, as if asleep. To bring it out is what education is all about. So the second principle, Sri Aurobindo brings out the core of national, what he called as national education. And that is nothing but discovering the genius within and bringing it, developing it, and then use it, make it part of our life. And if that has to happen, well, all of us will have to work. And how do we have to work? The third principle of education, through which Sri Aurobindo says, we have to work from the near to far, from that which is to that which shall be. That which is we driven by something not which is our core. What shall be is we shift the central point to this which is within us, the God within, which is ready to give us whatever sphere we chose to be, that genius part in us, and which we have to bring it out and make it part of us. And that is the third principle, the work that needs to be done. And one look at it and you understand the beauty of what Sri Aurobindo has given in order to prepare the nation so that it not only comes out of his tamas, but it moves towards light. And this is the agenda. And this is also, in a certain sense, the relevance and the need of integral education. What does integral education say? It says, deep within every one of us, there is a genius. There is an element of God, which is waiting to come out. The task is to find it, develop it, and express it. And if this type of an education is not needed right now for all of us, what other education will we be in need of? And that is the beauty of this integral education. But the story of the birth of integral education doesn't stop with this. It went on further because Sri Aurobindo has expressed what he wants to express. Now the time has come for him to start the work and show it to the world that this can be done. So that is how the question of preparing for the future came to Sri Aurobindo in 1910 when he was in the height of his freedom struggle. So a message came to him, well, finally, go to Pondicherry. He had no idea why he was being sent to Pondicherry, but once he came to Pondicherry, he was given a program so that he can put into action what he has shared with the nation, the agenda for the nation, and the agenda of integral education, which he called as national education at that time. What happened in Pondicherry? Well, when he came, another person from France, Mira Alfassa, whom we know as the mother, comes and joins, and they create a community where how a nation should be was reflected in how this community should be, where every aspect of life is based on that power from within. Now, here is an entire community whose single agenda is to base all their action, all their speech, all their thought, all their emotions, and all their feelings on that element deep within. And Sri Aurobindo gave it a name also, the psychic being or the soul. So here is an entire community which wanted to base their life by the inspiration from the soul, a soul-driven, a soul-based community life. And for the first time, Sri Aurobindo called, here is a yoga, here is a spirituality, which is collective in its nature, where an entire community has to base every part of its life on the inspiration from the divine within, the psychic being. And that is how we coined the word collective yoga. And before you can attempt it in the nation or even in the world outside, he and the mother decided to start the experiment right here in Pondicherry. And that is how in 1926, officially the ashram came into existence. But even that is not the end of our story of the birth of integral education, because for that, we have to move further into the early 1940s when the Second World War broke out. And that was a time when a lot of people all over India were under the threat of being bombed by the foreign powers. And they all thought that if at all there is one place which is the safest in the whole world, and that is Pondicherry, where Mother and Sri Aurobindo were there. So a large number of people came to Pondicherry and settled there. Among them, there were several parents too who were carrying their children. Now, Mother saw this. She didn't look at it as a problem. She looked at it as an opportunity to start in a formal way this futuristic education, which Sri Aurobindo had called it as national education, where the task is to find the divinity within and develop it and then express it. And then the name also was given to this education, where the mother established a center of education. And then that was the time the name integral education was given to this type of education, which is nothing but what Sri Aurobindo started as national education, culminating in what Mother termed then in the 1940s as the integral education. And center of education happened. All the people who are there as teachers were already aspiring to base their life, every aspect of their life, on the inspiration from within, from the psychic. And therefore, they were already, in a certain sense, were prepared to be the teachers. In order to, in the conventional school, if you have to become a teacher, well, you need a degree, the BL, B.Ed. But here, the degree was already been awarded because a group of people have already chosen to follow this lifestyle. And that is how the center of education came into prominence. And what we are looking at now is an experiment which is far advanced. And in a certain sense, the thought of integral education, the idea of integral education has started spreading throughout this country. So much so that for the first time this year, well, we are getting the glimpses of it in a program which is brought out at the level of the nation in the form of NEP, the National Education, the program which NEP 2022 has been brought out, has a lot of ideas which are reflections from integral education, but at least for the first time, something of it is brought into the public forum. And now we who are from a background which has already been attempting this type of education, which has come out of a lifestyle, which you can call it as the lifestyle of integral yoga, for the first time, probably the time has come for us to take this education and spread it and share it among a wider group of people. So this is, in a certain sense, is the relevance of integral education, why it is needed. Because when we look at the scenario outside, we are in a kind of a crisis. We thought the time of wars is already over, and then suddenly we get news on our newspaper that two countries are at war, Russia on the one side and then Ukraine on the other side. And what we thought was not there coming again, simply because there is something which is not resolved into it. We are inundated by the things which are coming from the internet. There is a mass of entertainment, mass of things for which we are not yet prepared are going to be so much flowing into us that it is becoming more and more difficult for us to remain single focused, concentrated on this one thing that needed to be done. Discover that genius within, the spark within, bring it out, develop it, express it in life. And it's going to be challenging, but this also is something that we need really, really essential. And this is the background that I wanted to share with you, that why integral education is needed. But integral education cannot happen in isolation unless and until the whole nation is given an idea for an integral lifestyle. And what is this integral lifestyle? Where each one of us try to discover that source within and base our life on that. And these are the two relevant things that I wanted to share with you: an education for the educational sector and a lifestyle for all who are Indians. so that we can look ahead into the future and prepare ourselves for the future. Because there is something which Aurobindo has said, the future is about to bring, but if we don't prepare, the future is not going to happen. So we'll take a pause here, and I'm going to ask, once again, request all of you, if you could switch on your cameras and feel free to ask any question related to what we have covered so far. It's a hefty task. And one thing I will say, the first step which all of us will have to take has already been given by the mother. And she says it so beautifully. If you think that this is a beautiful education, let's give it to all the children of India, it's not going to happen. Why? The first step before we can educate the children is to educate ourselves. If you have not felt this within ourselves, if you have not felt inspired by the spiritual force that is coming from within, what are we going to tell our children? We can't have another academic approach to the children where we can say things and leave it like that. I think the time has come for all of us to take that first step. We need to educate ourselves first, awaken to this truth, feel it in our life before we can take it to either the educational sector or any other sector in this world, be it economical, political, health, or whatever, science and technology, every field. Because here we have one person who has said that all life is yoga, and we are not going to leave out any sector from the expression of the spiritual power which awaits our discovery. So I'm going to throw it open to everybody and see whether any questions come up, or even if you feel like sharing something else. Ramnarayan ji?
Yeah, namaste. It's that, you see, Sri Aurobindo spoke about the national education, and I don't have a doubt that is integral education, but in the records, where does this change? Did he write somewhere about integral education, or we are interpreting as an integral education? Or even in mother's works, this integral and education together, these two words I hardly see.
So there are 3 places in which the mother uses the word integral education. If you can, it is interesting. I did the search long time back, and she has been indicating it. And in the 3 places that you can find in the volume 12 of the mother, if you type the phrase integral education, it will come. And the second thing is something which is so evident. So here is, I'm going to bring up once again what Sri Aurobindo has said and what the mother has said, just to tell you that even without using the same word, how much it is one and the same thing which is put in 2 different languages. So I once again going to share with you what Sri Aurobindo has said. Everyone has in him something divine. The second principle. Just follow me very carefully and you will understand. Everyone has in him something divine, something his own, a chance of strength and perfection in however small a sphere, which God offers him to take or refuse. The task is to find it, develop it, and use it. Now, I'm going to show you another place where the mother has said something which is very extraordinarily similar at a much later stage. Can everybody see it? There is a genius within every one of us. We don't know it. We must find a way to make it come out, but it is there, sleeping. It asks for nothing better than to manifest. We must open the door to it. So rather than me interpreting anything, I'm just going to show both of what Sri Aurobindo has said and what the mother has said side by side, and then you will see the beauty of what they have given. So there. On the one hand, Sri Aurobindo says everyone has in something divine. Mother says there is a genius within every one of us, and we must bring it out. And Sri Aurobindo says the task is to find it, develop it, and use it. Now, this much is sufficient rather than no splitting hair over a word. But when you go into the essence of what Sri Aurobindo has expressed and what Mother has expressed, and you see that it's the same thing which is getting expressed in two different ways, and not even different, I would say. They are so very similar in their approach. So we won't enter into the interpretation. We will share both and then we will leave it.
Yeah, thank you. I had that curiosity. It was interesting how you presented. And in the second principle itself, he talks about the dharma, and everyone stands for something, and if you don't nurture it, that means it is a great loss to the country and the nation.
Yes.
That should also be emphasized at this moment, what I feel.
So what I would put it is, when he expressed it, he was already glimpsing it, and he is already beginning to realize it, because that 2 years, 1908 and 9, he was undergoing the experience of the inner divine. And in that process, it came out as the first revelation, which later, after more yogic development, he and Mother together were ready to actually establish on a formal pedestal. So when formality came into question, then the integral education word was also born with it. Anybody else?
I'd like to ask a question to you.
Please, go ahead.
We see that, integral education is followed in Sri Aurobindo and the mother schools. What about the rest of the schools? I mean, are there scopes for the rest of the schools to adopt it?
Now, here's the question, which usually I get asked almost everywhere. This is too idealistic, and where are the people who will bring it into our mainstream education? Now, the current education that we follow is by and large British system of education. The subjects are still British. If you ask me, 3,000 years back, all scholars agree India was great in art, music, dance, drama, science, technology, you name it, we were great. What was the education which was practiced in those times, which made the people great, which made them excel in every field that they have chosen? What will be the name of the subjects which were there in that education? Unfortunately, we have lost touch with it. And we lost touch with it in a very short span. In fact, in a span of, let us say, 200 years by the British rule, they have kind of systematically removed things that will give us the clue towards making each one of us a genius in our own chosen field. And what was lost in perhaps 200 years, 150 to 200 years, when we were under the domination of the Britishers, can be now achieved in a much shorter time when we are not under the domination of any foreign country. At least outwardly, we are so much innocent. So one thing, what could be lost in 150 years with the freedom, with the awareness that we have, could be achieved in a much shorter time. That is one thing. Second one is the willingness to start from what the mother has given to, start with oneself. Now, we are always thinking of who will change the entire educational scenario, because there are lakhs of schools, and how will we bring it in? The real question that we have to ask is, each one of us who are getting exposed to the thought, willing to take the first step, which is to experience this truth within oneself in one's own surroundings. Why I am telling this is, one man, Sri Aurobindo, who had this realization, inspired millions in that 1908 and 9 when he came out and shared with it, and thereby giving us the clue that it is the people who practice and realize these things within himself are going to be the agents through whom this is going to spread. So the question is, am I willing to be an agent of this transformation, the agent of change which we want to? If so, know that in and around you, or the school of which you are part of, already the change is beginning to happen. And therefore, our first question to ask is not how all the schools are going to change their syllabus into integral education syllabus, but how do we create a group of people who can become the center of radiation for this type of an education. How many are we going to need? We are not going to need one person in every school to begin with. No, that is again being idealistic and being impracticable. But to reach out to a few who are ready to get fired up with this ideal, bring it into their life, make it part of their life, and then once they are fired up, they become living fires ready to become a wildfire. Anybody who comes into contact with them will catch that fire. So this education cannot be brought out in an academic way only by somebody from the top coming out with the program and then enforcing it on everybody else. That is not sufficient. We also will have to find a few people who can actually fuel and then make this type of an education spread in an exponential way. Definitely, we will need a sanction from the government level too. The NEP is an excellent thing. It has given up a possibility, but converting possibility into a reality will need a group of people who are all fired up, who live, who practice integral education before they become facilitators of integral education. So what I find as the missing link is, in order for integral education to happen, we need a group of practitioners of integral education before they can become facilitators. So we need to come up with a program in order to create the practitioners of integral education. Silently, quietly, they will prepare. And when they reach a stage of maturity, we are ready to explode into, in a very public way, this idea of integral education, because what we are then will communicate much more. So until that time, we can start quite a lot of things as a preparation. We are in this transition stage. So let's not now itself try to bring integral education into classroom and come up with a plan for it, because no plan is going to work that way. But we have to come up with a transition plan from the existing education. First thing, do we even question the utility of the current existing education? It has to start with it. We must change the mindset of the people first, that there is a better education, which, looking from all possible ways, is going to give us better results. So changing the mindset of the people, we have to reach out in all possible ways to people of all possible working fields, because they are all the parents who are going to put their child into a new system of education. And therefore, the challenge before us is for all of us who are grown up, in whatever field we are working in that field, bring about this change, the change that is inside out, to be so inspired that the work that we do in the field is an outcome of the inspiration from within. So that inspirational approach is what we need to bring in every field, not only field, in every moment in life. When we go home, can we operate from the place of inspiration? When I talk to my father, mother, my husband, my wife, can I communicate to them from the source of this inspiration from within me to that which is within them? Because they also have it. They may be quite good at hiding it, by the way, and usually they could do a better job of it, but it is there. And this is the beauty of integral education outlook, that nobody can deny that this help that they need in order to bring out the change is within them. People cannot say that, oh, Shivakumar in Pondicherry has a little extra, I have a little less. And that is absolutely wrong. Every one of us have this source of inspiration. It is just a question of the willingness to bring it out. And therefore, the first thing is, in whatever field we operate, let us bring in this approach of being inspired in our thoughts, feelings, and actions, so that our outcome also becomes so inspired. We bring about a change in the society in a general way, and specifically in the field of education. Let us try to create the group of integral education practitioners who will play the role of integral education facilitators in the future. So quite a lot could be done in this field. And if we come up with a plan, what we lost in 150 years, we can recover it in much less time. with all the freedom that we have.
Okay. So anybody else has any questions?
Hello, namaste. Can you hear me, Shiv Kumar?
Yes, Kedar.
Shiv Kumarji, I have one question. That if one is willing to adopt that integral education, and if there is a guide, as we have said in a first element of Sri Aurobindo, in one that you need not to be a teacher but a guide. So if there is a guide which is available, can you tell me a genuine timing to get avail that integral education if one genuinely adopt and follow in its practice?
So let me see if I have got your question correctly. If there is a guide to tell us how to go about this, and can we make use of that guide? So are you asking where that guide is?
No, total how to practically adopt that integral education. It is something.
I think we are losing.
Yeah, Kedar, we can't hear you because there's some connection problem. Maybe you can post your questions on the chat box. Or just switch off your video and we could hear you.
That you can try, Kedar. You can switch off your camera and see whether your connection improves.
Shiv Kumarji, I just asked that how much time one need genuinely from being a facilitator to a practitioner in that process.
Well, it's so interesting because the moment you talk about time in such action, there is no one fixed time for everybody, but the time required is directly proportional to the aspiration that we have and the intensity with which we approach it. Just to give you an example, well, Sri Aurobindo, who was all intense and full of aspiration, well, he achieved it in 3 days when he sat with Lele, what he wanted to achieve in that particular endeavor. So what I am in another place, what Mother says is very beautifully is that for those who have opened to the Mother, she can make it happen in a very, very short time. And she gives the assurance that even in 3 months, you can get connected with your psychic if you can completely turn towards it and aspire for it with an intensity. You want that and only that, everything else comes next. And then she says, the more intense you can be, well, the time can be very less. And she gives a very nice example also. She says, Sri Ramakrishna did it in 3 minutes. So he closes his eyes, when intensely aspires and gets connected with it, and it can happen in 3 minutes too. But we will need perhaps a little more time. But the beauty is the Mother has given us the assurance that if we can open up to her and then turn to her, well, you can make it happen even in 3 months. It's a beautiful quotation. I wish I can just quickly pull out that quote because it's so assuring that we are not talking about 100-year plan or we have to wait for several years, but it is left to our intensity and our aspiration, and that is going to decide how long I am going to take. Anybody else?
If you don't mind, I could draw attention to a text of the Mother, which emphasizes the work that we need to do. You are saying that we have to do. And in 1953 or 54. Yeah, in volume 5 it is there. In 53, towards the end, somebody is asking the question to the mother. It had been proposed that education in our school and our university center would be given in accordance with the ideal of Sri Aurobindo. But so far, the education given here is the same as in other schools. One follows the same program. Then mother talks more than a page about it, giving all the things, what is the work to be done. And what is the work that to be done? When you know all that, you will be once asked to teach the children from outside. So what is that one has to know? The angle of true life. So yeah, these are the things, and she differentiates the outside and inside, and the special atmosphere that the ashram has, and the consciousness one imbibes, the phenomenon of consciousness, that is important, which differentiates the integral education and the outside general education.
I think it's a long passage.
Yeah.
Ram Narayanji, if you could just give the reference, I think anybody who wants can go ahead. And
Yeah.
by the way, Kedar, for you, here is the thing. I have found the quotation which I was looking for. And this is something so beautiful. So it answers directly your question. In the present condition, this is what mother says. It can be done in a few months. So I'm going to read it out so that we know it's not a long-term project, but it's a very short-term project if you are willing. So what she says is, I'm going to read the highlighted portion. It is like that. First, the question is, where is the divine and how do I find the divine within me? And then she is practically saying that it is not to go away into inaccessible regions. It is right here. So she is saying the source that we are seeking within is not somewhere else. No, you have to travel and cross 7 seas and then climb 7 mountains and then you will reach it. No, it's not that far. She says the source which we are seeking is right here. And then she says only for the moment, all the old habits and the general unconsciousness put a kind of covering which prevents us from seeing and feeling. And then she says, you must lift that up. And then she says something which is what I wanted to share. In fact, you must become conscious instrument, conscious of the divine. And then she says, usually this takes a whole lifetime, or sometimes for some people, it is several lifetimes. So the idea that you got is prevalent everywhere. But then she says, here in the present conditions, you can do it in a few months. For those who have an ardent aspiration, in a few months, they can do it. And what are the present condition? The help that is available to us from Sri Aurobindo and the mother. If we turn towards that help and then can take that help, getting in touch with that source can happen in a few months. I still remember the mother's own experience when she was in Paris. She took 1 year in order to get connected with the divine within. And she used to describe that every morning, every evening, I used to be all the time thinking of how do I get in touch with this divine within. And she even describes, even while walking on the streets, she was constantly aspiring for it. So much so that when she was walking on one of the busy streets, suddenly she is pushed back. And then she was surprised and then looks at it. And then she finds an tramway, a train which is on the roads passes by, and she couldn't even see what is ahead of her because she was so much engrossed in it. And that gives us an idea. And then at the end of the year, this is what she says, because I made a resolution that by the end of 1 year, I will be touching base with my inner divine. And this is how she describes. And at the end of that first year, she had a most beautiful experience, which she describes, where she got connected with the inner divine. But she did it all by herself. She did not have any extra help. But in the present condition, we have tremendous help. And this is what I'm going to share with you. Another quote also from the mother. The will to realize this This is what she talks about. The will must never falter. The effort must be persevering and the faith unshakable. Then, instead of spending years to realize what one has to realize, one can do it in a few months. Now, this is what I read in the previous quotation, but no, mother is mother, so she wants to go far ahead of this. So she continues, one can do it in a few months, sometimes even in a few days. And then she says, if there is sufficient intensity, in a few hours. That is to say, you can take a position within yourself and no bad will that attacks the realization will have any more power over you than a storm has over a rock. After that, once the touching base happens, after that, the way is no longer difficult. It becomes extraordinarily interesting. So you have asked how long it is going to take. The first answer is a few months, but if we can put in a little extra, it could happen even in a much shorter time. So Ram Narayan ji also has shared something beautiful, but which please go through it.
It's a beautiful.
I have posted only the question, the answer goes, and one can find that in that text, and it is very inspiring for all of us.
There is a message in the chat box which says a very inspiring talk on integral education.
All right.
Yeah. So if there are no questions, are there any more questions?
I think if there are no questions, I will summarize and then we will conclude it because 12:15 is our time, but we will conclude it. So what we have seen today is the birth of integral education. Call it by whatever name. It started when Sri Aurobindo was in his freedom days. What happened within him, history seldom records. Unless he himself has mentioned it, we have no way of knowing it. And this is how he found that Sri Aurobindo, when he was in his freedom struggle days, came out for the first time as a 4-point program in order to free his country. And the fourth point, which is relevant to us, was a national education, which is a training of the mind and heart of the younger generation. He had already seen how education happens in England, and he says that is nowhere the same as what they are giving here within India. And that's what he said. Second one, he found that the whole of India is caught up in a tamas and it has to come out of it. And in order to inculcate in them a certain aggressiveness, aggressive virtues, he started writing so that the Shakti which we have abandoned comes back into our life. But this was what he gave to the nation before a crucial experience that occurred to him, the 1908-1909, a couple of years, which deepened his perception. And that was when he came out and told the whole world that here we need an education which functions on the 3 principles. And second principle, which says that there is something divine within all of us, and the task is to find it, discover it, and develop it. And he has given an agenda of integral education much before. And not only that, well, the occasion came to him to put it into action also. He came to Pondicherry, joined by the mother, and in 1940s, they created a center of education where this could be implemented so that the whole world can see. One thing is to talk, the second thing is to show the beautiful work that is happening. And what they've communicated through this is something beautiful, that if such an education is to be happening in the world, or at least in India, we need people who live and practice the virtues, the principles of integral education. And therefore, what we need, the need of the hour, is to create a group of people who live integral education before it can be taken to the masses. Outwardly, the world, at least India, is getting ready with an NAP program, seems to be promising on paper. But here is an opportunity for us until the integral education comes into practice. to look at creating transitional schools, which will be a combination of the conventional as well as what is unconventional. And that is the task that is given to us. We need to prepare the people, we need to prepare the schools who are willing to take up this experiment boldly. The change has to be brought about in their mindset first, and then gradually in their consciousness too, so that we come up with a program. So here is an invitation for anybody who feels inspired to take up the work. Let's go through that one single book on education, which has enough guidelines on us, how to become integral education practitioners before we can enter into the field to change the face of education. So over to you.
Yes, thank you, Shikmarji. We had such an inspiring session today. I mean, moving from the head and the heart to the psychic, and the whole integral approach to the way Mother says, go inside and work from inside. I think that's a beautiful session that you've had, and thank you for taking out time to share, having this session for us today. And we look forward to having more of your sessions. We look forward to hosting you in Bangalore next time when you're here. And thank you so much. And
Shivkumarji, namaste.
We have Ajitji here.
Namaste.
Namaste, Ajitji. So
I was traveling, so I logged it from my mobile, and now I have reached here, so I'm just joined with Yamini.
Most welcome. We have just come up with an agenda to create a group of people who live it and then help the integral education to spread. Then we can be quite effective. But at the mass level, a mindset change is what needs to be attempted so that the nation as a whole gets ready to accept this experimental education. So from both sides, we need to work at the mass level and at an intensely personal level too. And they will have to come together. And I'm so glad Ajitji has been sharing the beautiful work that has been happening, at least in Karnataka, where AUROBINDO Society is also part of the endeavor. In and through the NEP program, we are bringing in with an idea to create these transitional schools where eventually the whole of integral education will come to be practiced.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for joining the session, and we look forward to having you in the